So what are your what are your thoughts on this? What do we do? Look, as you probably know, we've been talking about free speech issues in this intellectual dark web group, for example. And a lot of the problems that we're finding are not exactly free speech issues. It's not really the government that's trying to shut you down, but instead it's sort of the informal, the institutions of civil society like newspapers and universities that have suddenly come up with a new concept, which is hate speech. And even simple biological reasoning is sometimes now considered hate speech. Do you see any tie-in between the erotic community and potentially even the scientific community in the ways in which these amorphous standards might get invoked?
I mean, I could hope that there is some sort of way that we can change these types of laws or perspectives and whatnot. I'm not exactly sure what it would take. I don't know if there's got to be like some sort of new television series that kind of lights people up in a different way, that now people can have a perspective where they look at us as like humans and they humanize us. I think that that's a huge part of it, is we're not given the opportunity to humanize ourselves. And I would be really curious to see what it would have to be like. If, do we have to all become scientists so that we get the check of a seal of approval?
Well, I'm claiming that even biologists are now running afoul of concepts like hate speech. Like, for example, what if you start talking about a study of trans issues, and you discover that trans is a giant umbrella category where some parts of trans are disorders, some parts of trans is just nature doing what nature is somehow going to do, and somebody says, "Well, wait a minute, that's completely illegitimate because you're misgendering people." I don't think that biology is a way to hide out anymore. I think that, in fact, the biologists and the pornographers are weirdly and quite unexpectedly somewhat in the same boat now, that we have a very potent political strain that's trying to regulate what can be said. Mm. And that you guys are in somewhat of a similar boat, but that because there's no, I would never encounter you in normal life, probably, because our worlds are just very unlikely to collide. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts?
I think that when it comes to I know right now I'm working on this documentary, and they're following myself as an adult actress, and they're also following a researcher who studies sex, and she speaks about how she gets death threats and things like that for being this almost highly sexual woman, even though she's literally studying how vaginal secretion happens or things like that. And I think that it is we have this lack of free speech, and we have this I don't know if it's also the era of where everyone is just highly offended by everything as well. I would have thought that with social media and all of these things, and even music, the way that music has kind of even become more hypersexual and aggressive, that our culture would be more accepting to these types of, ways of life, whereas rather than kind of see the opposite side of it, I think that when it comes to being able to be free with what you can do and say in sex work, and researchers, I'm not too familiar with the researchers, but I was definitely I thought of this book Bunk by Mary Roach when I heard about the research study of the researcher in the documentary, where it talked about I think it was in the 50s or something like that, where they were all studying animals, having sex with animals, because it was so taboo, and you were a pervert if you watched two humans have sex, even though that's the only way to actually study people having sex. And to get real information, you'll get information about monkeys if you're watching monkeys have sex. But it was interesting to me that it was so almost pornographic for them to even be able to watch people and study them, even though that's how we're trying to understand biology and science.
Well, I have to admit that I have a couple of odd theories about this, and I was curious how you might find them. One of which is that, in some sense, the normal world, which I understand you call the civilian world, that the civilian world is almost hypocritical and in denial by design. That is, we aren't supposed to have an accurate picture of human sexuality, because our society is based on what I call load-bearing fictions, that people are supposed to present as relatively asexual, that their default assumption that they go around with is that they are not sexual beings, and you're supposed to hide this aspect. And then there are contradictory expectations. So, for example, you might be expected to wear cosmetics in a workplace environment as a sign of professionalism, but the cosmetics, in fact, may be sexualizing, but then you're not supposed to admit that the cosmetics may, in fact, be sexualizing. So, in some sense, the civilian world is a mess by design, because we're not supposed to see ourselves accurately. And that the world of sex workers is bizarrely a truth-telling world, a world in which people are far more honest. And there's another one of these, which I think is the world community of evolutionary theorists. And believe me, you can't invite those guys to parties either, because they'll tell you things that the civilian world does not want to hear. What do you think about the idea that, is it possible that commercial sex workers are just much more honest and undistorted around issues of sexuality, and that, in fact, this is why they have to be excluded?
I would say so. I believe one time when we spoke previously, you mentioned to me, I could be quoting it wrong, but the real estate effect or something like that, where it was like the woman can sell you potentially not a suitable home because of her sex appeal, and where she is dressed in a nice suit, maybe there's a little cleavage showing, she has the makeup done, and you as a general person is kind of, you're in a daze because you see this woman almost before you see the household. And I think that with adult entertainers, we kind of are always so sexually driven, and sex is everywhere. It's our whole lives. I feel like I even personally experience less sexual tension when I'm on set, because we are always naked. They are so used to seeing naked women that it's not even a statement or a question or anything like that.
Well,